I'm here today with Frank Klepacki, who's composed game soundtracks for some of the biggest publishers in the video game industry, including Westwood Studios, LucasArts, Electronic Arts, Sega, Ubisoft, Disney, SSI, Hasbro, and Virgin Interactive. And he's also the recipient of the PC Game Magazine's Best Game Soundtrack for Command & Conquer Red Alert. Between 2008 and 2011, Frank was also the touring drummer for the Family Stone, which featured Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees and members of Sly and the Family Stone, saxman Jerry Martini, and trumpeter Cynthia Robinson. In addition, Frank's music has been featured on several cable TV shows, as well as on ABC TV, including America's Got Talent, Top Gear, America's Most Wanted, Pawn Stars, and a ton more. Since 2004, Frank has served as the audio director for Petroglyph Games, the developer for Star Wars Empire at War, as composer and sound designer for a wide variety of game genres featuring a wide range of compositional styles. You mentioned that your parents were a huge influence on your choice of career. Were there any other influences, teachers, friends?
Yeah,
heroes?
well, I mean, gosh, I would say, like, especially influence-wise, I mean, I can tell you that John Williams' score to Star Wars is absolutely one of the biggest eye-openers for me as a kid, being impressionable, in terms of knowing subconsciously that that's someday what I would love to do. Because, I was probably 3 years old when it came out, and or 4, and I saw it on video for the first time. I didn't get to see it in the theater, so after it came out on videotape, I'd watched it for the first time, and I knew nothing about it. I just knew that, it's supposed to be, fun movie, action, whatever, And the first thing, as you know, that happens is, and the whole, you see the big letters on the screen. All you see is scrolling text over space. But this friggin' awesome, amazing main title theme is playing, and it already hooked me from that first note. I was just like, whoa, just like it knocked me back out of my seat. And I loved the music so much that I was already in. I was already immersed in this movie without anything happening yet. And then the big ship comes over there, and I'm like, oh my God. Didn't know what to do with myself. I had to go ask my parents to buy me all the toys after that. But
of course. But
I just knew right then in my head that this is the most amazing thing ever, and someday I need to do this. And fast forward to, in the 2000s, I joined Petroglyph, and our first game that we get to work on is Star Wars Empire at War.
Right, yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Did you get a chance to, did you get access to any of the scores? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Dude, I was a kid in a candy store for that entire process. The entire 4 years of Empire at War and Forces of Corruption, or 3 years, however long that was.
So John Williams was one of your first musical heroes, and then you got to do music based on his score.
Exactly.
I mean, how cool is that?
Exactly. It doesn't come more full circle than that. So, I mean, that's dream come true number 1. Dream come true number 2 is, and then going back to the influence question, I mentioned earlier Vince DiCola is, one of my huge influences as well. When I first heard his Transformers themes in the 1986 animated feature, that soundtrack really affected me. I think it was about 12 years old maybe when that came out.
I saw that movie and I don't remember the soundtrack at all. And I think I would have because I was already in music at that point.
Well, because it was I was of course paying attention to everything I was hearing. I was already a fan of Transformers number 1. Sure. I had all the toys and I watched the whole animated series on TV. But and I was familiar with the animated TV show themes, which were pretty cool and different for the time. There was sort of a rock band mixed with a symphony, at the time, and I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. And then Vince DiCola came along with the film and just turned everything upside down. It was like, man, this score is all synthesizers. It's got some rock guitars. It's got some bands playing in it, and it was so different for the time that it had a profound impact on me. And I said, now that is just the definition of cool, and I have to figure out how to do that someday. So fast forward 2 years later, I had the opportunity. A friend of mine was interviewing him for an online article, and he said, hey, I know that you're a big fan of his, and you know more about his work than I do, so can you help me come up with some questions to ask him? So I was like, can I help you?
Can I help you? Are you kidding me?
So I wrote this whole laundry list of questions that were very pointed and pertaining to his career and his, musical style and all of this. So he noticed that when he did the interview and appreciated that and wanted to, write a note to thank me. So he actually sent me an email. I got an email from Vince
Very
DiCola.
Very cool.
Hey, I understand, that you helped contribute to the questions. I just wanted to say I really appreciated that, you were familiar with my work and and thank you very much. And I was just like, are you kidding? And so then I wrote him back and I was like, well, thank you, and I proceeded to tell him how much of an influence he was on my own work. And then I had the opportunity to meet him in person. So he invited me out to his house and got to hang out at his studio, and we just listened to music and traded stories and had the best time. So now I'm actual, he's a friend of mine now.
Very cool. So you've been, and that's what usually happens. You've been on both sides of that coin where you have fans and you know what that's like, and you know how much you appreciate them, appreciating your work, and then you are a fan of someone that you actually become friends with, and you learn that these are just regular people who have same interests as you. And
just very talented, creative people, and ultimately, we as artists, we appreciate art and we appreciate work that resonates with us, and it's easy for us to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget that, the stuff we do also resonates with other people too.
Yeah. As long as you're not crazy with a celebrity that that you're interacting with.
Well, I think being in the video game industry is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing in the media on a constant basis. With TV stars and popular musical artists. In that respect, we have sort of a niche and a community that we're a part of, and I think it's a little bit more intimate and a little bit more accessible in that way. And so you, in a sense, it's more welcoming. You want to invite people to, to experience, part of what you're doing, and then they in turn want to be a part of that as well. So it's kind of a symbiotic thing, instead of being on this ridiculously elevated status that you have to have bodyguards surrounding you and you don't you
never get privacy.
Just to me that's kind of ridiculous. So,
and actually that's exactly the reason why we are recording for this podcast is there are people who are fans of your work that you just want to share the information with.
I'm happy to do it.
By the way, going back to Kyrandia, did you know that Sierra Online almost bought Westwood Studios?
Yeah, I had an idea that was sort of on the table at the time. I knew that Westwood was being looked at by a few different companies at the time, and that Sierra was a big contender for that. And of course, we were fans of Sierra's games too.
Sure.
I played King's Quest, I played Space Quest, I played, the Leisure Suit Larry, loved that. Police Quest, I played all of those, 1 and 2 in particular. And then, and ironically, the lead designer of Police Quest came to work at Westwood.
Yeah, that's right, Jim Walls, sure. And he worked on Blade Runner.
Yeah, and
a few others.
Worked on Pirates with us too, yeah.
Right.
So that was fun.
Well, the story that Mike Legg told me, president of Petroglyph Games, he said that Brett Sperry and Lewis Castle came to Oakhurst, where Sierra's headquarters are, to pitch the Kyrandia game, that they had a working prototype, and they wanted Sierra to be the publisher. And they had as far as I know, they had no interest in being purchased by any company. And from what I heard, Ken Williams really loved the game, and not only did he want to publish it, but he wanted to buy Westwood as a result. And then all of a sudden, Virgin Interactive is in the picture, and there's a bidding war going, and Ken Williams doesn't want to overpay for a company, and it's too bad, because now that we've seen what Westwood has become over that period of time, he would have made a bundle of money by going ahead and competing with Virgin Interactive. But a little story that I think I've only told on one other podcast, and that was I was at Sierra at the time when Brett and Lou came calling, and I was upstairs and I was working on, I think, King's Quest V at the time. And I went downstairs to where the meeting room is, the boardroom, and I walked through, because I had to walk through that room to get to the department that I was looking to go. And I saw Brett and I saw Lou. I didn't know who they were, but I saw the game on the screen, and for some reason that just got cemented in my memory. And so years later, when I saw Kyrandia come out, and then I eventually met Lou and Brett, I recognized them. It was like a 10-year-old memory. I recognized them from having been in that boardroom. I said, "Didn't you guys come out to Sierra one time?" And Lou said, "Yeah." And he gave me the whole story too. And so there was a point there where we almost worked for the same company early on, but
it could have happened.
And we eventually did work for the same company. But
actually, you bring up King's Quest V. That just reminded me. I played that, and I remember really enjoying it. And then when we did Lands of Lore, I was actually one of the main theme. It might have even been the credits theme to kind of summarize the whole game. At the end.
We traditionally did like a medley of all the major.
Yeah. So I kind of took influence from the musical score of King's Quest V,
cool.
and applied that to the score I was doing for Lands of Lore in the first one, and then the very end of the game. Yeah, I did this whole medley of with the nice running harp and all of that stuff. I was, so
very cool.
So a little nod to King's Quest V there.
Sure. Yeah, that was. Mark Siebert and I collaborated on that soundtrack, so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So then everything changes. Suddenly, VST technology is introduced. That stands for Virtual Studio Technology, introduced by Steinberg, and everything you learned about sequencing and MIDI and all that stuff is now changing overnight. Can you talk about how the first game you worked on where VST technology was part of the mix?
Yeah, so really it was, let's see, VST I started using it actually much later than when it was brand new, because computers, as you know, were not very fast. I mean, even though technology was increasing, it was still limiting as to how much of it you could use.
Sure.
And I found myself just peaking out immediately with that technology. Loading up virtual instruments and sample-based. Some of the first early uses of the Giga Sampler and things like that.
Oh yes, I remember that.
I just remember capping out immediately, and I was just like, man, I can't use this. I was just like, this. I stuck with my Akai S5000s and Emus and Roland S760s. I kept loading those guys up, and because I could still get good quality instruments and run a lot of them and chain all of these MIDI modules together and still get a great sound. And even though I was hearing stories about people having to build farms of PCs just so they could get the bare minimum of quality instruments, running smoothly, and I'm like, I am just not going to do that. I refuse. No. So I avoided that for a good chunk of the beginning of that era, and then I finally embraced it. Actually, around the time after Westwood closed, believe it or not, I didn't even use VSTs for any of the Westwood games that I worked on. The last Westwood game we did was Renegade, Command & Conquer Renegade, and then Earth and Beyond. And I still utilized all hardware synths and samplers for those games.
Oh, you did?
So when I started using VSTs actually on Star Wars Empire at War, that was the first one.
Is that right? Interesting.
I spent 1.5 years as a freelancer, and that's when I got exposed to Native Instruments Contact.
Right.
And I immediately loved that sampler. I was like, this is what I've been waiting for right here. And at that time, computers were finally ramping up in their speeds and their CPU power, that we could utilize that, and I could load an entire orchestra into the thing, and I would still be pushing it, but it would still work. I could still render out a theme that would sound good, and I was like, okay, this is where it's at now. I'm going to go this direction.
Briefly touching on what you just said about Westwood closing, I'll tell the story for those who don't know it. Westwood Studios was owned by Virgin Interactive, and Virgin Interactive was planning on closing their interactive division, so they put the company for sale. The most attractive part of the company was Westwood Studios, and EA came in and bought the studio, mainly for the Command & Conquer license. Mm-hmm. But as true to the form of Electronic Arts, they shut down first the Orange County studio where I was working, and then eventually the Las Vegas studio.
Sure.
It got its doors shuttered.
It was the end of an era.
Yeah. But Command & Conquer's still going strong. So then, after VSTs become mainstream, there's something called impulse response convolution reverb.
Oh, yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
So basically, that's impulses are basically where you can capture the actual you put up the you can put up microphones in a room essentially, and then capture how that room bounces the reverb around,
and you fire like a little cap gun or something to get the impulse.
And then you can take that information and put that into a plugin, a reverb plugin, that will then play that impulse back based on the way that responded. So you can essentially mimic that room in a plugin with that impulse. And there's a great plugin that Steinberg has in Cubase, in their latest versions of Cubase. It was called Reverence.
Right, I've used it.
And
it's
that's
awesome.
an impulse-based reverb that is just amazing. I mean, they've got a lot of great rooms and halls and arenas or whatever. I mean, they've captured a ton of different options into that thing, and then allow you to put your own in too. So it's really cool.
For those who don't know, I'm working on the sound design and the soundtrack for Space Venture, which is the spiritual sequel to Space Quest. So the guys from Andromeda who created the original Space Quest series invited me to work on their game, and I'm using it for speech as well. I mean, if you watch movies, it sounds like the guys are in the car, but they're not really, and they add that later, using this kind of reverb you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And I needed a sound where someone is trapped in the side of a very small jar or a small bucket. And I found a series of free convolution reverbs where one of them was the sound of the microphone in the bucket with a cap gun going off, and it sounds just like you're in the bucket. It's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, it's great what you can do with that. Yeah, I mean, you can apply it to anything. Yeah.
So do you use that technology a lot in games now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I use Reverence on everything. I mean, of course, I'm a huge Cubase guy. I started, after I abandoned the ad-lib Visual Composer, I went to Cubase when it first made the jump to PC. It was originally on the Atari ST.
Right.
And one of the audio guys that worked with us at the time, his name was Pat Collins. He was using it on the Atari ST and sort of introduced us to that.
And the reason it made his debut in the Atari ST is because the ST had built-in MIDI ports.
Yes,
Right.
So it made sense. Yeah. And it was just a great interface, great layout. It was very intuitive, and I was able to get going on that really, really quickly. And I've used every version of Cubase ever since then for the last, however many years now. And it's just, it keeps getting better. They keep making great, strides with that. Even if it's the smaller features that they introduce, they're still viable. They still are very usable and make sense. They've been able to evolve that program in such a way that it's very powerful, and I don't see any reason to ever deviate from it.
It's a great package. I use the same package. One of my favorite things is you can put the mixing board on the iPad.
Yeah,
you can use Wi-Fi to have the iPad talking to the PC, and they'll recognize each other and handshake, and you load up the software on the iPad, and you've got a virtual mixing board there. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
It's genius.
So you don't have to keep mousing between the mixing board. And
yeah, exactly. You know from firsthand experience how painful that is. Then.
Yeah. Although I was really happy with the way that they retooled that layout of their mixing board. It's a lot more straightforward now. And I love the fact that you can just copy and drag and drop all your plugins into any track, and it's a lot more easy to use than it used to be.
Right. So we're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk about performing. Mm-hmm. You've performed your entire life from age of 11, and but I read on your webpage that you toured with Family Stone as the drummer.
I did, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, that would be dream come true number 3 for me.
There you go.
It was Sly and the Family Stone. For those who don't know who that band is, they were a revolutionary funk rock group that emerged in the late 60s. And they played the original Woodstock, and anyone who knows anything about that era of Woodstock will tell you that if there was a battle of the bands, they would have won it.
They performed higher there, as I recall.
Well, and their whole slew of hits, for that matter, that they had at that time, and they just electrified 400,000 people in a way that you just don't see.
Well, their music is inspiring. Really.
Yeah, and it's not to take away from anything that the other bands on the bills were bringing. I mean, there was great groups like Jimi Hendrix and Santana and The Who. I mean, and you've got all of these giants of that time period playing together. And Sly and the Family Stone was such a unique group for that time because they were able to sort of bridge, the funk crowd and the rock crowd and the psychedelic crowd of that era and get everybody on the same page, basically. And you have to remember this is also a time when, you know, you have the civil rights movement that was fresh in people's minds, and you had the Vietnam War that was going on. And if there was ever an example, a public example set for how things could be, it would be within this group, because you had black and white people, male and female people, all working together in harmony and making great music. And they lived through that and persevered through that, and stood out as a positive beacon through that. So when I saw Woodstock the movie for the first time, and I was a hard rock fan mostly, I saw the Sly and the Family Stone segment, and it blew my mind. This was another mind-blowing moment for me. Just like, wow, what is this music? This is amazing. So
you hadn't heard any of their music?
I had heard some of their songs before, but to see them perform it live was a whole other thing.
Sure.
They had a they had a whole other energy about them, and just, you know, this is an example of how a live performance can be better than the album. And so number one, it's got that going for it. Number two, you know, I'm seeing this as a live show, and this intense crowd who's responding to that.
Right.
And see, it's getting me moving. It's getting I'm just like, yeah, this is awesome. I gotta know more about this. I gotta figure out, you know, how can I do that someday, you know? So I tried, you know, to play in different, you know, funk bands, you know, that I was in, doing original material with horns and all of that, and had a blast doing it, and it was great, you know, and just never could quite get it off the mark the way that I wanted to. But through doing that, one time there was a Sly and the Family Stone website, like a fan site that a guy put together, and I remember visiting it every so often because he would post news about what the members of the group are up to now, you know, and this is in the 90s, you know, when I'm late 90s.
And by this time the band had disbanded and moved on their own solo careers and stuff,
Yeah, I mean, you know, Sly kept his group going, you know, kind of through the 70s, then it sort of, you know, waned after that.
Right.
But one of the news posts on this fan site was, hey, it's Sly and the Family Stone original sax player Jerry Martini's birthday. He was turning like 50, I think, at the time, or something like that. And they said, you know, if you want to wish him a happy birthday, you know, we'll pass it on to him, you know. I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of fun, you know, so I'll just write in, and whatever happens, happens. I wasn't expecting to hear anything back, you know. So I wrote, you know, hey, Jerry, happy birthday. Love Sly and the Family Stone's music. Your sax playing's awesome. You know, huge influence on funk music that I write and love to perform today. Hope you have a great birthday, and hope you know, keep performing for years to come. You know, something to that degree, something to that effect. I wrote. And so then he wrote me back personally and thanked me for the note, and said, hey, yeah, that's cool. You know, glad, you know, somebody's, you know, keeping funk music going. I'd love to hear what your band sounds like sometime. You know,
really?
I'm like, cool. Really? Cool. You know, so then I started a dialogue with him in that way, and we became email buddies. And I sent him, you know, my albums of the funk band I had at the time. It was called Home Cookin', and he really enjoyed it a lot, and said, man, your horn section sounds great. Love the tunes, you know, I can hear the influence, you know. And we just got to starting to chat that way. And, you know, fast forward from that point, I mean, we maintained a friendship, and whenever he would come to Vegas, you know, if he got the Family Stone performing again, you know, with some of the original members, and then, you know, a few others that were hired on. He came to Vegas, he would invite me to, you know, come backstage and hang out, or, you know, get me a comp ticket, you know, to see the show. And that was all fun. And, you know, I would tease him once in a while and say, Jerry, man, you got to let me sit in on a song one time. You know? Just put it out there. He's like, oh, man, we keep our show the way it is. You know, sorry, man, but, you know, love to jam with you sometime otherwise. But, so he actually...
But, yeah, you got to drop the hint.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, a few years after that, I mean... they made some changes in the group. The original drummer of the band, Greg Arico, you know, had taken some time to do some other projects, and so he wasn't available for a period of time. And you know, and they just switched management. And Jerry called me personally on the phone and said, hey, listen, Frank, you know, it was great seeing you last time we were in town, we made some changes in the band, and, you know, we need a drummer now. Would you like to be the drummer in the band?
For the Family Stone.
And I'm like, what? Are you kidding?
Who is this really?
I was like, Jerry, give me 1 second while I pick my jaw up off the ground, and then I'll give you an answer.
Yes.
Well, but then the first thing that came to mind, of course, is, I've got a steady career, in Petroglyph. I work here full time, so
right.
How does this touring thing gonna work? How often are you guys on the road? Because it's something I can't just like pick up and do, even though I'd love to. What are the circumstances? And so he's like, well, he says we mainly perform weekends. He's like, sometimes we do extended, 4-day jaunts here and there. He's like, so. It's like, if you can make that work, on a semi-regular basis, then it'll happen. And I'm like, all right, well, let's do it.
Yeah, because they all have families too, and like to be home during the week.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the shows they do are part of festivals, and of course, a lot of those are taking place on weekends. And then
right.
they'll do dates that fit into nearby cities, and kind of make a 4-day, 3-day weeks out of it or whatever. So that worked out great for me because I was able to work a full work week, fly out on a Friday night, go do the gig Saturday, Sunday, come back on Monday, or take a couple of days off here and there. And that was just an awesome time. I mean, for 3 years, I got the opportunity to do that. And how often does any musician get to say, I toured with one of my heroes, I mean, it's pretty awesome. And I had to kind of smack myself a few times on stage and go, I'm not in a tribute band. That's really them.
That's really them, yes. And there's also Cynthia Robinson.
Cynthia Robinson on trumpet. I met personally for the first time when I started playing with them. And she is a sweetheart. I love her. Love Jerry. I mean, everybody in the band is great. The rhythm section actually is all Las Vegas based now. The bass player Blaze Sissone, he moved to Vegas from Hawaii, but had a history with Jerry in Hawaii, having performed with him there because they both used to live there. And he's also the music director for the band now. My good friend Nate Wingfield, who plays guitar for them, I've known him since about the same era, since the late 90s, performing in different groups here, and he comes from a long line of touring, royalty, funk groups and R&B groups and hip hop groups. I mean, he's toured with everybody from Stevie Wonder to Curtis Blow to the list goes on and on. So, and he was always a lifelong fan of the Family Stone. That's how we bonded. We were on a gig together one time, and what's your favorite band? Family Stone. Oh yeah, man, we're gonna be friends, no problem. And then here we are, both years later, playing in the same band.
In the same band.
It's another ironic thing that's really awesome. But Cynthia is great. I mean, probably the most recognized woman of trumpet there is, and she's just got so much soul and so much sass and pizzazz, and
awesome.
Night after night she would just bring the attitude and play like she always has, and it was great. And Jerry's always been a fantastic, fun personality, to hang out with. It's a great group of people. It's like you think of rock stars that have been doing this for years, and you get an idea in your head of, they must be partying all the time and da-da-da. And, it wasn't like that at all. We were always just hanging out, having dinner together after the show, just having great conversation, have a glass of wine or something, But, for the most part, it was just very chill and relaxed, and we just all got along great. It was perfect. I couldn't ask for a better experience in that regard. So, and
did you guys record an album during that period?
No, we didn't do any recording. We just focused on performing the music, that the band is known for, and throwing in a couple of, things here and there for the fans, but and Greg Arico, the original drummer, has been back with the group since then. Yeah, ever since I heard he was coming back. I took a step down, and I'm always available if he needs me to fill in for him. But I'm friends with him too. And he's also a great guy, and it's an awesome relationship.
Did they ever talk about the Woodstock experience?
Oh yeah, of course. I pinged him for all kinds of questions. I remember asking Jerry. I was like, on the movie of Woodstock, when you guys did Higher and came to your sax solo, you just sat there and you blew one note as long as you possibly could, the entire 8 bars. You just I'm just like, how the hell did you do that? And he's just like, I just kept telling myself, don't run out of breath,
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great, a lot of great stories with them.
I'm going to shift gears now. I've noticed that you've done a little bit of television work for both the US and the UK markets.
Yeah. So a lot of the primary work I got into was through a mixed martial arts sports genre, that Ultimate Fighting Championship has made very popular.
Right.
And it kind of started with that. I knew the audio director of UFC in the early 2000s, and he's still working for them now. and he was working in a recording studio here in town, and I would take my projects to go get mastered there, or I would do some work there occasionally. And he had heard about me through other bands that I'd recorded, and he's like, "Wow, this sounds great. Who did this?" And they would tell him, and he's like, "Oh, where'd you do it?" "Oh, we did it in his garage." And I was like, "Really? In the garage?" He's like, so we got to know each other, kind of through word of mouth that way initially, and then we both had, of course, mutual respect for each other as engineers and the work we did. That because he did fantastic work as well. His name's Mike Sack, and so he started listening to some of my solo albums that I was putting out, which was a combination of hard-hitting electronica mixed with rock, which was sort of a staple thing I established throughout my Command and Conquer scores over the years. And I call it rocktronic music.
That's. I think you just coined the phrase.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. I put out an album. My second album was actually called that, and I kind of just referred to it as that style ever since. So he's like, some of this would work well with this, UFC stuff that I'm kind of helping coordinate. He's like, would you mind if we, license this music, and we'll make sure it gets through the right channels and you get paid for it, and da-da-da. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem, So we worked out a deal there initially, and then he was like, yeah, anytime you have something new, just forward it to me and we'll see what we can use, And so I just kept forwarding album after album that I would put out, and they would keep using. They would pick their favorites, that they liked, and they would use it in the programming for the walkouts or montages or weigh-ins, and they still do to this day. And then
they still use the same music that they license.
Yeah, and I still give them new stuff here and there. They've asked me for custom scores, here and there amidst that as well. So I've done some of that. And then that led me to another couple of programs. There was a channel called HDNet for a while, which I believe is now referred to as Access TV or something like that. And the producer of those shows, knowing myself and knowing Mike, said, "Hey, can I get you to score original music to these new MMA shows we're doing? We're doing Inside MMA, which is like a commentary, sort of a sportscast thing, like Inside NFL or Inside any of those other sports, but this is MMA related now." So they launched that show, which is still running now. I did the main themes for all of that and all of the in-between stuff. And they also had another thing called HDNet Fights that came out, and they wanted scores for all of the fighter walkouts and the intros and outros, and did all of that. And then through licensing after that, that really just kind of took off. I got associated with some other contacts that wanted to start licensing out my work, and so through that I ended up getting on a slew of other television shows. Like
just word of mouth,
Got Talent and Top Gear and all, and I just. And a lot of times that I don't even know about it until I get the check in the mail. I'm just like, oh, I'm on Sniper's show now, and
So they're basically taking the music that they've licensed and they're repurposing in all these different shows.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that for the people who are listening, that's an amazing fairy tale career course you've had there. So where can people buy your albums? I'm sure they're on iTunes, right?
Yeah. All my solo stuff is available on all the digital services: Amazon, iTunes, Napster, Rhapsody, Spotify is a big thing now. It's available on there too, and then also on my website, of course. Physical CDs are still available. I just do limited runs now because it's a lot of people are more into the digital realm. But there's still a market for the physical media, so you still have to make it available. Ever
been tempted to do vinyl?
I've thought about it, but gosh, that's so niche. I can't bring myself to go there.
So other than music, what do you like to do in your spare time? Tell us a little bit about the personal side of Frank.
I do so much audio stuff even in my personal time. I'm recording and producing other bands, or working on new music of my own, or performing in different groups. I get occasional pings for unique gigs. Most recently, I was hired to play drums and write horn charts for the HBO Emmys party that just happened in 2014. And that was a huge thing. I mean, it's the most uber event I think I've ever attended, and I've had the luxury of being able to get hired for that twice. So that was pretty awesome. Working with a 10-piece band, horn section, 3 girl singers, guitar, bass, keyboards, drums, and you're playing for all of the stars and production people and anyone else associated with HBO, basically. So literally the whole Game of Thrones cast is there, and the Silicon Valley cast is there, and Veep, and on all these other shows. And even actors that are on other programs will just show up because it's a cool party to be at.
And you're part of that scene.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, it's great to get to perform for that audience. It's a completely different thing. And, just the trouble they go to decorate and build such a setting for that event is astronomical and beyond what you'd ever think is possible. They take a giant courtyard of the Pacific Design Center in LA, and they basically build right over it. The head guy that's in charge of doing that, who also got us to hired out of Vegas to perform for the thing. He builds this whole giant canopy, and it's carpeted, custom carpet, custom drapes, custom everything, down to the tables and the chairs and the bar and the stage. Everything is built from scratch, and it's pretty amazing to walk onto this thing and go, wow, this wasn't here before, and now it is.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for spending this time with me and the listeners. I've had a lot of fun doing this. And
yeah, you're welcome, man.
I appreciate your time, and I'm really thrilled that we're working together again.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's this industry, tends to take people in full circles, sometimes. So it's a pleasure to work with you as well, and I appreciate doing the podcast with you. It's cool to go down memory lane a bit and think of the mindset of some of these projects and fun technologies that we've had the opportunity to grow with over these years.
Indeed. Yeah, a friend of mine, I'll close with this. A friend of mine, I'll quote him when I say this, that nobody really leaves the game industry. They just change booths at E3.
Yeah, that's a great statement.
Yeah.
Love it.
Thanks for your time, sir.
Right on.